Ayo, what's up everybody? Wuthering Waves 2.x series is finally complete, and all the twists and turns of the story have been crazy. So today we're diving into the entire story of Wuthering Waves during the 2.x series. Prologue Games has been consistently dropping main story quests since this chapter started. Since the drop of 2.0, we got a prologue, 11 acts, and a number of non-main quests that contribute to the understanding of major sections of the story. There's no way I can fit everything into this video, so I'll mainly be sticking to the major important events. So please, bless this video with a like and a share for this massive undertaking. Needless to say, not every detail is going to make the cut, but I have already gone over pretty much the entire main story, act by act, in detail in other videos. So if you're looking for a more detailed recount of a specific act, with the exception of the finale, I definitely got you covered. Because we're constantly giving info about the past through the present, just like my 1.x video, I've decided to cover it all from the beginning, but through the lens of what we now know after having journeyed through all these acts. That said, let's get it. Now, we don't actually know when each past event occurred and how much time occurred between each event, and this is for a number of reasons, and explaining why would be a whole video in and of itself. However, despite some overlapping time frames, we do know the general order of events, and the story goes something like this. A long, long time ago, people from various nations had their homelands destroyed by the devastating forces of the Lament. They set sail through turbulent seas to find a new place to call home. Tossed and turned in terrible storms, they struggled to survive and didn't know where to go or how to navigate. Well, Sentinel Imperator spoke to the people. It guided them through the storms to a new land, the archipelago that would become known as Renacita. It already had the Genesis Nexus set up. Imperator gave the people technology, and it welcomed the people and revealed itself to them. People worshipped the Sentinel as their god, and everything was fine. They all lived happily, but not ever after. It wouldn't be long before a being known as Leviathan Thrunodian emerged. It began to speak in the Sentinel's name and grant miracles. It deceived and confused the people, and there were many who followed the Thrunodian as a result of its deception. Some of them even sacrificed themselves to the sea, pledging themselves to this false god. And you may think, like, how? Why? How are these people switching up so easily like that? Well, as we'll eventually learn, Leviathan's abilities allow it to corrupt the minds of the people through a spiritual plague. It constantly whispers to those affected until they crack, becoming its puppet, unable to tell the truth from the lie. So basically, some of the people viewed Imperator as the one true god that saved them from the seas, gave them knowledge and technology, and some believed in Leviathan, thinking that was the deity that originally saved them. Eventually, war broke out amongst the people because of their discrepancies on faith, and among those who sided with Sentinel Imperator was a group known as the Phasalia family. The battle would result in lots and lots of bloodshed, and ultimately, the Phasalia family would lose the war and be reduced to keeping the truth to themselves, publicly changing their beliefs and ending up keeping this knowledge of who the Sentinel is a secret. And that's pretty much all for the Phasalias right now, but remember the name because we will be coming back to them. Sentinel Imperator rose up against Leviathan. However, Imperator was getting beat down, like bad, and it just couldn't find a way to get the upper hand. Now, we don't actually know what Rover was doing during this time, but what we do know is at some point, Rover was basically like, Imperator, yo, you gotta do something. I need you to uncover the true nature of the Thrunodian. And Imperator was like, okay, I'll do it, but under one condition. Basically, that condition was to be set free. It wanted unrestricted access to operate how it wanted to and however it sees fit. Because just like Sentinel Jue, Sentinel Imperator answers to Rover. its major actions all have to be authorized by us, the rover. So Rover agreed. With his newfound unrestricted ability, Imperator came up with an idea. The worst possible idea. It decided to merge with the Zenodian. The intention was to allow the Zenodian to believe it had won, while allowing the Sentinel's consciousness to reside within and discover how to defeat it. However, it took a couple precautionary steps beforehand, in the way of guarding some of its knowledge and data externally. But Imperator did it. It merged with the Leviathan. And basically, what it discovered was that the Zenodian didn't even know how it could be defeated. Imperator deduced that it couldn't be defeated, not as long as civilization exists. So this effort was not fruitful at all, and it only went from bad to worse. It was this contest for power against the Zenodian that resulted in an event known as the First Dark Tide. The clouds gathered together, and a dark mass cracked open, pouring down a waterfall of dark energy and tacit discords, wreaking havoc across the lands, devastating the people of Renacita. Within the Dark Tide, the Zenodian essentially established a kingdom for itself, a sanctuary of false promises that feed on the subconscious of Renacita. This is the epicenter of the Dark Tide and the place from which it all flows. This place, this kingdom, is called the Journeying Paradise. The frequencies of people and inanimate objects inside sing eternal hymns praising Leviathan. The idea of the Journeying Paradise really invaded the psyche of Raguna, and it became part of their religion. They came up with stories, or rather lies, from the Zenodian about what it actually was. It was said to be a place where sickness, hunger, sorrow, despair, and dullness of heart cease to exist, where glorious deacons sing eternal hymns. Of course, none of that was true, but the lie refused to die. Sentinel Imperator was doing worse than ever. Its people devastated, and false beliefs corrupted the once pure religion of the people. Its mind and form was fused to a creature who still held primary control. However, eventually, there was a man that Imperator would use to change everything. This man was Napoli II. He traveled the seas to find the truth of the Journeying Paradise on the first pilgrim's sail. When Napoli got to the Journeying Paradise, what he found was no paradise. It was a place of darkness, suffering, death, and destruction. However, it was there that he received a relic from Sentinel Imperator, containing a portion of its power. This relic was in the form of a lantern. By the way, this is precisely why the shape of Renacita's Pangu terminals look the way they do. It's an homage to Napoli II. Anyways, this man would use this power to defeat the Dark Tide. Make no mistake, him defeating the Dark Tide is not the same as him defeating the Zenodian. But anyway, Napoli II would go on to become Raguna's first Primus. The position of Primus is the leader of their religion, the Order of the Deep. And in Raguna, the Order holds complete control over legislative and judiciary actions of the entire city-state. Napoli may have saved the people of Raguna, but he did not walk away unscathed. During his battle against the Dark Tide, he would become corrupted by the Zenodian. And just like I mentioned before, he would get those whispers from the Zenodian, eating away at him and his perception of reality, slowly becoming Leviathan's puppet. And he'd never told anyone about this condition, but eventually he came to the Phasalia family. He knew their history with the Sentinel, and he broke, telling them the truths that he'd never told anyone else. The truth that the Journeying Paradise is a lie. He gave the Phasalia family a sword named Turvin. It was infused with the Sentinel's power. Finally, he told them that he'd been hearing the whisper of the Zenodian ever since he stood against the Dark Tide. He couldn't take it anymore, and he begged them to release him from this world. And they're the Phasalia, so they did. Anyway, after this, the Phasalias and the Zenodian had two separate but important things going on at the same time. In order to unleash the power of Turvin, the Sword of the Sentinel, the Phasalia family developed rituals to find someone who could resonate with it. The rituals they created were horrible and straight up torturous. They would take girls from families of aristocrats and even girls from poor families if some rich family wanted to participate. Once these girls were a part of the rituals, they would then be subjected to all sorts of psychological trauma. One of the most notable tasks was having the girls make poisons to feed to their ritual mate friends. The surviving girl of this series would then go on to attempt to resonate with Turvin. Now, it's not clear how far back this ritual goes, but this went on for a long time, possibly centuries. Eventually, this would lead us to a girl named Cantarella. Hold it. Put a pin in that because we're gonna come back. It's not Cantarella time just yet. After the defeat of the first Dark Tide, the Thenodian set its sights on something that would allow it to walk amongst the people, wielding its power in physical form, and something that would give it the ability to spread its spiritual plague in person. It needed a resonator. This would help Leviathan Thenodian avoid having their plans disrupted again, just like before. Leviathan Thenodian tried and tried over centuries to create its own resonator, but every time it failed. But it would always keep trying. One such attempt was its creation of a girl named Mia. Mia was a kind, sweet girl from Raguna. She was a devout believer of the teachings of the Order of the Deep, but for some strange reason, she had a desire to become a Septimontian gladiator. Now, this wasn't all that common for the average Ragunese, but it almost seemed like she was made for it. Spoiler, she was. You see, the Dark Tide affected Septimont too, but it had nowhere near the same level of impact that it did in Raguna. In fact, it didn't even happen at the same time, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, it didn't have the same impact, and that's because the Septimontians don't really have strong religious beliefs. They choose not to place their trust in the Sentinel, but rather in the power inside themselves and the abilities of each gladiator. So it's much more difficult for a Leviathan to spread its religious mind virus there amongst a nation of godless warriors than it is in a place that champions faith above all. Sentinel Imperator was well aware of this fact, and I believe that is precisely why it placed its central hub and civilization time capsule in Septimon. And in order to gain access to information Imperator had hidden before the merge, Imperator set two stipulations to access the central hub. One of which was there needed to be a gladiator. The stipulation on the gladiator was that they had to win Septimon's most prestigious title, Champion of the Great Aegon. The Thenodian really wanted access. Getting access would ensure Imperator wouldn't be able to stop any future Dark Tide outbreaks. So as Mia made her way through each opponent in Septimon's Aegons, the Thenodian's whisper was growing louder and louder. She began talking to herself and breaking down crying in between each match, but eventually she won. But just as she made her way closer to where the central hub was located, the Thenodian began to exact more and more control over her. But something in Mia just would not let her go through with it. In an effort to escape from it all, she plunged her sword through her own chest and leaped from the cliffs into the sea. And she was never seen or heard from again. The Thenodian would go on to craft another being. This one was called Cartithea. Now, the way the story is told, you might think Mia lived, died, and failed as a Thenodian's resonator, and then it created Carti, but really, they were actually created at around the same time. And it didn't only create Cartithea, it created an entire backstory for her, complete with townsfolk who knew her, a loving mother and father, all whom the Thenodian brainwashed and gave false memories into raising and encouraging and accepting her. Cartithea would then grow up to be called the Blessed Maiden and be given the title Fleur de Lis. It was during the coronation ceremony, specifically the moment where she was crowned Blessed Maiden, that the second Dark Tide kicked off. The implanted memories of everyone who'd ever met Cartithea were now wiped, as if she never even existed. She was now Fleur de Lis, the Blessed Maiden, and this time, the Thenodian had succeeded. It finally had created its own resonator, a huge section of the Order's massive seminary, Avenolium, was catapulted into the sky, leaving a giant crater where it once stood, bore waters. Now, just as the Leviathan was cultivating and preparing its resonator, the Sentinel knew something that the Threnodian didn't. It came up with a plan that might finally destroy the Threnodian for good. Imperator knew that there was some sort of natural law that there could only be but one resonator per Sentinel or even Threnodian. If this law is broken, it would spell destruction for the being in question. And this is what Imperator sought to do. In order to react to this plan, it of course needed a resonator. And who better than someone from a family that holds its most powerful artifacts? A family who never stopped believing from the start. Sentinel Imperator starts forming a connection with one of the ritual's winners, Cantarella. It selected her to be the true Blessed Maiden. But to actually become the Sentinel's resonator, one must go through their second awakening. So Cantarella does as instructed. She resonates with Turban. She sees the old sanctuary of the Order, Avenolium, and starts undergoing her second awakening. However, Cantarella understood exactly what would happen to Imperator, so instead of letting it and the Threnodian die at the same time, she forces Imperators to accept all the power generated from the second awakening process, hoping that this power would allow Imperator to regain control over the Threnodian. To be clear, this was not a part of Imperator's plan, but Imperator just rolled with it. It told Fleur-de-Lis to strike, and she cleaved the beast in two, destroying the physical form of both Imperator and Leviathan. And for the time being, they are still recovering from this attack. What happened next was Cardathea, using the power of the Threnodian, split herself into two beings. They are both her and share the same names and titles, but for the sake of differentiation, the one we meet, the small one, the one who wants to live, is Cardathea, and the other, larger being containing the Threnodian's essence is Fleur-de-Lis. Fleur-de-Lis would be sealed by the power of the three swords within the innermost portion of Avenolium, and this was 20 years ago. And all the chaos with the second dark tide, it beginning and ending, and the Sentinel's plan, all this occurred right around the time the Enlightened One, Fenrico, began serving as Primus of the Order. He was there when Cardathea was crowned Blessed Maiden. However, somewhere along the line, it's not explicitly said when, this well-meaning man became corrupted by the Threnodian. When he was in the Order's seminary, he seemed to have the best intent for the people of Ragunna and its Sentinel. But the Whispers, man, they got to him. And many of the current prominent beliefs held by the people of Renacita were shaped by him. He rules with oppressive religious manipulation. He claims to be the Sentinel's resonator. But of course, this isn't true. In fact, no one's even seen Sentinel Imperator for centuries. During the time Fenrico's been Primus, he's made numerous radical changes over Ragunna over the years. Remember how we talked about Napoli II going in the Pilgrim Sail and discovering it was all a lie? Well, Fenrico brought it back. Only now, the Pilgrim Sail is a tool of punishment. It's essentially a death sentence under the guise of a religious pilgrimage. And the dishing out of these sentences is pretty cavalier. He placed more and more restrictions over Ragunna's carnival. And worst of all, he's been collaborating with the Fraxidas. As we all know, Renacita is known for its echoes. It's sometimes called the Land of Echoes, creatures that originate from the left-behind frequencies of tacit discords. The echoes in Renacita are different than other places, to say the least. And Fenrico and the Fraxidas are part of that reason. Now, it might be possible for echoes to maintain prolonged physical form and peacefully coexist with humans naturally, maybe. However, many of the common echoes we see in Renacita were results of feats of engineering, and this special distinction between Renacita's echoes and the echoes of other places would later be regarded as the Sentinel's gift. People would be told that the Sentinel gave Renacita's inhabitants this blessing to have echoes that just act like this. The truth is, there's a place deep down under the sea called the Fabricatorium of the Deep, where Fenrico, the Fraxidus, and a secret team of the Order manufacture, decommission, and recycle echo frequencies to be just how people want them. This makes the people of Renacita complacent when it comes to adopting new technologies, or even old technologies like the Pangu terminal. In fact, the vast majority of Raguna's population don't even have or use Pangu terminals because everyone relies on common echoes available from the Genesis Nexus. And I could go on and on about how he's altered the state of Raguna. But back to the Fraxidus' collaboration. The fruits of their first known partnership kicked off at least 10 years before our present story takes place. Everything happened according to their plan. A sea of fog shrouded the city. Echoes paraded like lost souls. A dragon soared above, and a sea creature stirred up towering waves that devastated the city. Fenrico claims that these events were punishment for the people's indulgence and division, and he used this event to plant the seed of fear amongst the populace. And this became his reason to ban the carnival, and they would never have another until just this year. And that's because he wants to strike even more fear into the people so they'll never desire it again. And even after this event with the Fraxidus and Fenrico, they still had some dealings. It's implied that the awakening of Overthrax, Huanglong's Threnodian, was not only for the Fraxidus' own purposes, but it was also in their grand plan that connects to Renacita. And that's mostly all the major events of Renacita from the past to this current point. And as the video goes on, I might reference these things from time to time as they become relevant. That said, here is where our story begins in the present day for Chapter 2. At the end of Chapter 1, Act 8, Rover along with Shorekeeper had just fixed the Tethys system. And so we head back to Black Shores to speak with Shorekeeper, and there we learn a couple different important things. Shorekeeper notices that Abby's frequency is weakening and reveals that Abby secretly came to her for help, worried that its growing hunger and fatigue might harm Rover. While searching the Tethys system, Shorekeeper finds a hidden recording, and it's left by us, the Rover, in the past. In the message, past Rover is basically like, okay, if you're hearing this message, I know it's because you succeeded in fixing the Tethys system, because this message was set to not be available until Tethys was fixed. Past Rover explains that all the data about our past was erased intentionally by himself, and that after the memory wipe, they would awaken and become us. Past Rover already knows about Abby's weakening condition and tells us to seek out Imperator of Renacita, giving us a beacon of light that unlocks more of Rover's spectral power. Shorekeeper says that this journey might be the key to stabilizing Abby, because Renacita is known as the Land of Echoes. It contains many intelligent echoes with physical forms, and the timing for this is perfect, because at the same time, we get a letter from the Montelli family, and we're invited to Raguna for the Carnival Festival, and they're giving us the whole VIP treatment, entertainment, expense funds, and all. And what makes this event even more significant is that this is their first carnival in 10 years. Shorekeeper has Alto arrange transportation for us. He sets us up with a boat from the New Federation, and we're off. On the way, a huge tacit discord named Cetus the Tidebreaker attacks our boat. But Rover is saved by Captain Brant of the Fool's Troop, and we both look out and notice a strange object on Cetus's tail. While this might not have been noticed by them, it's very important to the story that this object on Cetus's tail is Frolova's flower. The crew on Brant's ship includes Rosia, another resonator, and many other friendly echoes, similar to Abby. We ask Brant about Imperator, but he tells us we won't be able to meet the Sentinel. However, he explains that the carnival and its tradition of crowning someone with a laurel will allow them to hear the Sentinel's voice. And with this, we have hope that Abby's problem can still be solved. After this, we arrive at the Lighthouse of Dawn. Rover witnesses a pilgrimage of the Order. But this doesn't look very voluntary. And that's because, just like we talked about before, Fenrico has been using this as punishment. Of course, we don't know what's going on at the time and prepare to make a move. But a playwright named Cristoforo stops Rover from intervening and explains about Rinascita's religious system, the legend of the Pilgrim Sail, and Primus Fenrico. Cristoforo admits that the Pilgrim Sail may hide a darker truth, leaving Rover uncertain about what awaits in Rinascita. When we finally get to Ragusa City, once again we run into the Order, right at the gates. It's our first time directly interacting with them, and while this situation only gives us a small amount of friction, it provides a perspective on just what kind of ride we're in for in Rinascita. They ask us for our declaration papers for our Pangu terminal. Of course, we don't have what they're asking for, so we display our invitation from the Montelli family. And this also speaks volumes to how much weight the Montelli name holds, because they just let us go. And the reason they're so funny acting about terminals is because using Echo terminals is quite rare in Ragusa, and this is because of their relationship with Echoes. So we asked them about meeting with Imperator in person, and the guy at the gate goes off explaining that everyone has a spiritual connection with Imperator, until Phoebe shows up and eases the tension. She shows us around while giving us a little bit of history of Rinascita. But eventually she has to go, and I only mention her because she'll show up again in the story later on. When on our way to Alvarado Bank to pick up our entertainment funds, we run into Zani. She tells us about the Montelli family, and that they've placed her in charge of looking after us. After helping us get our funds, we decide to grab a bite to eat together, and that's when something strange happens. There are Echoes practicing dance performances for the carnival nearby. And randomly, their color shifts to red and they start attacking people nearby. And this kicks off everything and basically starts our entire journey in Rinascita. Just as one of the Echoes appears to strike at us, Frolova's flower dissipates and we hear the Sentinel's voice asking for help. The Echoes run off, but the questions linger. Why would a Sentinel be in need of help? Of course, at this point, we've experienced the Jewish situation, so we're thinking perhaps this is something similar. But as you already know, this situation runs even deeper. After this, Zani starts telling us about the Montelli family and their motives for getting this whole Echo Carnival performance to work. So essentially what's going on is the Montelli family is like very, very rich. And their motives aren't all money motivated in this case. They want to be the people behind making Pangu terminals a thing in Rinascita, bridging the gap between them and other nations. And as we start investigating this case, it becomes apparent that there is some bad blood between the Montelli and Phasalia families. And it soon becomes obvious that the Phasalias are behind this incident, specifically a man named Gilberto. But then, the plot thickens even further. Turns out the Phasalias are colluding with the Order to sabotage them. And then it turns out the Order is colluding with the Fraxidus. By the way, I forgot to mention that some of the people were freaking out when the Echoes attacked back in the city. And that's because stuff like this doesn't usually happen. But not only that, it's also because, if you remember back, Fenrico essentially made them believe that the carnival incident from 10 years ago was Imperator's wrath and punishment cast on the people. And this event today was too similar to what happened 10 years ago. And what we find out over the next 2 acts are 2 main important things, and that's history and history. We discover the history of Rinascita, the Dark Tide, and Imperator, much of which comes from sources that mislead us quite a bit, and we learn about the incidents that are occurring now and how similar they are to the past. A sea of fog shrouded the city, Echoes paraded like lost souls, a dragon
roared above, and a beast in the sea stirred up towering waves.
Basically, this all occurred from the Fraxidus by way of Fenrico's request. He'd been setting up these calamities along with Frolova to corrupt common Echoes and corrupting Lorelei to create a crushing fog, artificially starving the Dragon of Dirge so that it will soar above the city, and corrupting Cetus the Tidebreaker so that it would create towering waves to devastate the city. Alright, but I'm getting ahead of myself right here, so let's go back a little bit. Along the way, we run into Cristofaro again, and he's looking for inspiration for his play about the Blessed Maiden. He couldn't find much information about her origins, which makes a lot of sense when we reflect back on her history and how people's memory of her were erased. But keep this tidbit of the story in mind. It's foreshadowing for what's to come much further down the road, because it's all coming full circle. Okay, so jumping back to where we were before, we piece the puzzle together with the Fool's Troop and come up with an action plan. And everything comes to a head when the carnival kicks off. In the city, we finally catch a glimpse of Frolova, in person this time. We head off to a secluded place to talk, and she acts like she doesn't really want to fight us or anything like that. She says that she's just playing her part of this grand show, this grand theater act. And then she's just like, scrap, jumps off the building and does her domain expansion. And summons a bunch of echoes for us to fight. And together with our friends, we easily dispatch all of them. And then she finally summons her personal echo, Hecate, but it's still no match for us. The threat that everyone seems to have forgotten, Cetus, the tiebreaker, finally comes into play. But Zani and Phoebe are prepared and they handle it with no problem. Finally, we're awarded with the laurel and we're able to hear the Sentinel speak to us. It tells us that it is ensnared in an inverted tower in the sky. This place is of course Avenolium, part of the Order's seminary that broke off during the Second Dark Tide. The Sentinel also tells us that the Lost, aka Cartathea, is here at the Carnival Festival, and we should seek her out while we still can. We walk around and we find her, and she's dancing on water. And just as we're about to take her hand, Carlotta arrives, and Cardi has to leave. We ask her name, and just as she says it, it seems as though she's going to say Fleur-de-Lis, but she catches herself and says Cartathea. After this, Carlotta asks if we're okay, because people have been saying we've been talking to a wall. Then it becomes quite apparent that we're the only ones capable of seeing Cartathea, at least in this instance. The next day, we're invited to an outside dinner party by Carlotta. There we catch up with the rest of our friends and discuss all we know and what we don't know about Cartathea, the Sentinel, and the Trinodian. And as they're trying to piece things together, they end up getting everything totally wrong in terms of who's who and which resonator Cartathea might be. A member of the Order cuts in to let us know that Fenrico has invited us to come talk, and so we go to meet him. Fenrico tells us a lot about the Blessed Maiden, the Dark Tide, and the Sentinel. But in the end, Rover is left confused as to what to believe, which honestly is completely understandable because all the artifacts we've come across, the various conversations we've had with Carlotta, talking to Fenrico, and actually meeting the Blessed Maiden, it's a lot to take in, and a lot of the information is wrong in some kind of way. So we take a moment to stop and assess what we know, and what we find is Abby's condition is worsening. At this point, it's taking even longer for it to respond, but when Abby is finally out, we remember what the Sentinel said about being up in the sky in some inverted tower. And together with Abby, we start thinking about a way we can get up there, and that's when we bump into Chacona. She was sent to find us by Carlotta, and Carlotta wanted to see if Chacona's abilities might help us be able to get in contact with Cartathea once again. So Chacona uses her forte, and it works. Even better than she expected. We're able to not only relive our past memory meeting Cartathea, we're also able to converse with her in real time, in the present moment. She tells us how she's sealed in this Sonaro sphere and she can't get out. And she also tells us she's seen a jellyfish-like aura roaming around the outside of the realm's border. And this jellyfish turns out to be none other than Cantarella, the 36th matriarch of the Phasalia family. After Chacona's forte concludes, a representative of the Phasalia family serendipitously meets us there, telling us that the family's head wants to meet us. This, of course, is met with some apprehension, because despite the fact that I've talked about how the Phasalia family has always sided with the Sentinel, throughout the present day story up until this point, they've been taking on more of an antagonistic role, and all our interactions with the Phasalia family thus far far have been hostile or suspicious at best. Well, turns out that the whole shouldn't be judged by a few individuals. People like Gilberto aren't the norm. It actually turned out that Gilberto's misdeeds were the result of him being under the influence of the Threnodian, and his mind was slowly being chipped away by Leviathan's power, and eventually he'll beg to be put to rest before he completely succumbs to being the Threnodian's puppet. Anyways, we end up accepting the invitation to meet Cantarella, and it turns out that Cantarella is frequently outside the border of Cardisanaro because she's actually trying to find a way inside because she wants to understand the condition of the Sentinel. And Cantarella is good friends with Chung Li, and through their conversations, Cantarella learned about our heroic deeds in Huanglong, and she learned how we saved the Sentinel and we battled their Threnodian. And she wants us to get Jue to help save Sentinel Imperator. But Rover's just like, nah, I don't really think Jue is in the best condition to do that right now, and it's still recovering. As we continue to talk with Cantarella, we learn more about the past, all those things I told you before concerning her, Cartithia, and the Sentinel. So we finally agree to help, and we're able to resonate with Turvin, and we use Turvin to break the barrier to Cartithia's Sonaro. And there we're able to learn even more about the history we previously discussed involving the Dark Tide, the Threnodian, Cardi, Cantarella, and everything. And we break the various seals in place meant to hold the Dark Tide, until we arrive at the place where Cartithia has been hearing voices emanate from. But the voices she had been hearing wasn't exactly the Sentinel. She puts the pieces together and remembers that the voices are actually coming from her, or her other half. And that's the half that contains the Threnodian. Cartithia wants to sacrifice herself, but we just won't let her. And we decide to go in and face Fleur-de-Lis alone. And then we scrap. Rover struggles during the battle, but Cardi finally emerges and she sacrifices herself to grant us more power. And this power gives us some of the abilities of the Sentinel. Now blessed with the power of Arrow, we rise again and defeat Fleur-de-Lis, and she reverts back to Cartithia as her frequency begins to leave her body. What we don't see during this entire ordeal is that the Threnodian used the lingering Sentinel's power to split a trace of its frequency, and it hid it in a gem. And this gem will come into play in just a little bit. After this, we're mentally transported to another realm, and we see Sentinel Imperator before us. Due to its body being destroyed in the second Dark Tide, this is the only way it can manifest, and it tells us about the past before it sacrifices its life force to resurrect Cartithia. When the Sentinel asks about removing Fleur-de-Lis from her memory, Cartithia says that she also wants her memory as Fleur-de-Lis to stay a part of her. And so the two once again become one, and Abby finally realizes that its mysterious ailment dissipated the entire time we were in the presence of Cartithia. Cartithia enjoys her newfound freedom. However, strangely, we sense her frequency is unstable. Even stranger than that, when we go to Cartithia's realm to check on her, she's mysteriously missing, and there's lingering resonance energy everywhere. So where does she go? She's actually in Septima, in Cristofaro Sonaro, tracking the Threnodian's energy. But at this point, Rover doesn't know where she is for sure, but we're still able to track her frequency to Septima. She sensed the Threnodian's frequency growing stronger, which is why she started tracking it in the first place. And for some strange reason, it's getting more and more powerful. And all of this is because the Threnodian is regrowing its power from that single gem of frequency we talked about earlier. And this is done not without the help of the Fraxidus. So remember back when I said Cristofaro wanted to write a play involving the Blessed Maiden? Well, that's because he's a resonator with the Fraxidus, and his forte is all about creating plays and bringing his work of fiction into the real world. And in order to execute his forte ability, it would seem that there's some type of requirement. He needs a real world stand-in to be replaced by his creation. His original plan was to have Cartithia be used to revive the Threnodian back to full power and give it physical form. However, due to our actions, he wasn't able to do this. We prevented his plan. So he and the Fraxidus have set their sights on Mia. But how? Mia's dead, right? Well, the Fraxidus retrieved Mia's body from under the sea in Septima, and they've restored her body and are attempting to revive her through one of Cristofaro's works, and then awaken the Threnodian to possess her body. and they've built an entire underground lab to incubate her remains into a vessel for Leviathan. In order for Cristoforo's plan to work, he created an entire Sonarosphere that's a 1-to-1 replica of Septimont City, and he's using his abilities to have the play he created to run non-stop to wear down the subject's frequency that matches with Mia. The person he chose? Lupa, a woman who loves gladiating just like Mia, who has the power to win the Great Aegon just like Mia. Lupa, a person who essentially idolizes Mia, to a point where in one scene, she's willing to compromise her morals and standards on match fixing at just the idea of rumors that maybe Mia did this. Of course, we know that isn't true, but it speaks to how connected Lupa feels to Mia. So she's the perfect person to match and be replaced with Mia according to Cristoforo's plan and his play. And using Mia would finally grant Leviathan access to Imperator's central hub. Of course, Rover, Lupa, and Carthea all work together to thwart the Fraxidus' plans in their own separate but unified ways. Carthea has been encouraging and reviving and preventing Cristoforo's play from ending, allowing Lupa to continuously have a chance in the play in order to have the play Lupa continue fighting. And Rover figures out the plan and realizes that they can't do this. So we send Lupa into the play to steal back her role from Mia. Once inside the play, the resurrected Thernoidian possessed Mia was defeated. But the frequencies generated from this fusion coalesced into an even more brilliant and powerful gem. While at Imperator's central hub, we receive a relic set aside by Sentinel Imperator, whose purpose at this point in the story had yet to be revealed. So back to that gem. This brilliant gem was expected to be collected by the Order, specifically Fenrico, and taken to his secret underwater lab, the Fabricatorium of the Deep. It's revealed that the Thernoidian possessed Fenrico and wants to use the gem in combination with Frolova's abilities to bring the journeying paradise to Renacita. However, Frolova swiped the gem and she doesn't want to give it back. But to be fair, she was kind of hard carrying a lot of the operations down there. When this act begins, we're tracking Leviathan's frequency by info given to us by Black Shores, and end up meeting and confronting Fenrico during his search. And during this conversation with Fenrico, the conversation goes left, and he summons a huge wave, casting us into the sea. Frolova saves Rover, and she convinces us to help her so we can mutually benefit from this situation. And she needs us because she's hurt and extremely weak. And the reason why she's so weak and her powers are drained is because she had been overclocking for over 2 weeks, expanding her Lost Beyond to meet the needs of Fenrico's request. Now, I just mentioned the Lost Beyond. So what is it? It's a Sonarosphere Frolova created to house the frequencies of those wiped out from her hometown. Her hometown was destroyed when a giant meteor crashed down on top of it, destroying the entire village. So she reconstructed her hometown and its inhabitants from their frequencies to create this Sonaro. And the driving force behind all of her actions, including joining the Fraxidus, is to resurrect the people from her hometown. Through our time spent with Frolova in the Fabricatorium, we learned that her and Rover met in the past, and we learned that Rover promised to come back and see her again. But apparently, Rover not doing so was the straw that broke the camel's back, as far as her trauma-bearing ability could withstand. This sent her down a different path in life, and we find out all about this from her Lost Beyond. After leaving Frolova's Lost Beyond, Fenrico gets a hold of the gem, and Rover and Frolova face off against him. Frolova attempts to snatch the gem, but fails. After this, Fenrico starts summoning Dark Tide monsters. We eventually defeat these monsters and defeat him, but he attempts to use the gem to summon the Dark Tide. Then the Lantern Relic emits the Sentinel's power, stopping Fenrico and allowing him to have some control over his mind and body once again. As he recovers, he prays to the Sentinel to protect the people of Renacita from the paradise, aka the journeying paradise of the Dark Tide. Then he drops the gem. It rolls right in front of Rover and Frolova, and they face off. Rover stabs Frolova in the chest, and Cristoforo teleports in to snag the gem. Rover is at a loss, but we feel a faint frequency. This frequency is Frolova, indicating she's still alive down in her lost beyond. Cristofaro either appears to us as a man named Nestor or created him. I don't think it's exactly revealed if it's Cristofaro in disguise or his ability to just create people. Nonetheless, Nestor's in Septimont by way of Cristofaro's power, and he tells us a great deal about Augusta and her origins. And right after this, we're actually contacted by Augusta, the Ephor of Septimont, and she invites us to her palace because she wants us to join the hunt. Now, what is the hunt? She explains that the hunt is considered both an honor and a duty among Septimontians, and has been so for 100 years. It's how Septimont resists the dark tide. They send their best warriors to a place called Sanguis Plateau to fight and hunt creatures spawned by the dark tide. And she explains that the giant blight cloud above the region has been there since the first dark tide. So basically a long, long time ago. Augusta selected us to join for a couple reasons. One, she and the warriors of Septimont recognized just how powerful we are, and they want to fight beside someone like us. And two, because of our unwritten fate. Essentially, our fate cannot be read as easily as other people. When our fate is attempted to be read, it just shows up as a blank slate. And as strange as it is, our blank slate of destiny fits right in line with the missing pieces of Septimont's prophecies at Tetragon Temple. So essentially, they think we are the one of prophecy. So we agree to join, but state that we have our own reasons and goals to accomplish. We tell Augusta about the info we received about the Sentinel's relic being there, and the journeying paradise. As for the Sentinel's relic, Augusta says that we need to head to a place called Earthrend's Wedge. It's a place where the Sentinel first descended upon Sanguis Plateau, and it's the epicenter for every hunt to this very day. But due to its significance, not even Septimont's highest officials have been allowed near it. Augusta says if we need to go there, she can make it happen. Now, if this dark tide stuff wasn't enough, the Fraxidus, specifically Cristofaro, continues to insert himself in our efforts. This time, Cristofaro created a being named Avidius through one of his plays. Avidius joins us on our journey, and he's not even antagonistic. He genuinely tries to help us and joins our efforts to fight against tacit discords and dark tide threats. I think the purpose of Avidius' creation was just Cristofaro testing his abilities, and later we find out that Cristofaro wants to see just how far he can take his new creation. Sidebar. It's pretty crazy how everyone in Septimont's memories just accept Avidius' past as if it all really happened. Yo, Cristofaro's power is crazy. But anyways, Avidius doesn't participate in the final battle on Sanguis Plateau because he kind of has a nervous breakdown when he finds out he isn't real, which is completely understandable. Anyways, we see that everything Nestor said was true. Here on Sanguis Plateau are the withered ruins of a town where Augusta is originally from, Fabianum, now known as Murmurstown. It was destroyed 16 years ago by the dark tide. This means this was a separate dark tide from the outbreak that generated during Cardothea's coronation 20 years ago. Nonetheless, during this dark tide, Augusta, with her childhood friend Angel, who would later be known as Galbrenna, struggled to survive. Angel was a very powerful girl and a resonator since birth, able to absorb frequencies of even legendary tacit discords. And I bring all this up because that day, Angel showed that she was powerful enough to resist the dark tide and the Thernodian. She would eventually be swallowed by the dark tide, never to be seen again. But she walked away pretty much unscathed. So I don't know why she didn't drop by to say hi to the homie Augusta, but anyway, this would inspire Augusta to pursue power to protect her people and to vow once again to find her friend Angel. And since that day, she never stopped hearing the whispers of the Thernodian. But you know, she's from Septimont, so the Thernodian's manipulation doesn't really hit the same out here. However, we use this fact to our advantage when fighting one of the Dark Tide's elite vanguards, the false sovereign, which conveniently is exactly where we need to go, Earthrend's Wedge. So, together with Augusta and Yuno, we devise a plan against the false sovereign, and it works. However, the downside of this plan is that Yuno dies. And even worse, no one remembers she even existed. This is because her forte is tied to fate. And her deal with fate is essentially that whenever she uses her power, it diminishes her life force. The greater the quantity of power, the more life force it takes. And in this instance, it took so much of her power that she basically turned to a blue dust, died, and was completely written out of history. So, after all of this, we go to Imperator's structure at Earthrend's Wedge, and we're finally able to receive the relic, the civilization capsule, but we can't yet seem to figure out how to open it. After this, we go back to base camp with the Septimonian gladiators to celebrate our victory. And this is where we discover that we're literally the only ones who remember Yuno. She's never even existed in everyone else's mind, including Augusta, one of her closest friends. Shortly after talking to Augusta, we find the ghost of Yuno, and she basically tells us what happened, but Rover can't really accept that end for her. So we search for any trace we can find of her existence to the present reality, and we end up at Tetragon Temple. There at the temple, in a secret chamber, we find Avidius and Grandma Lilibet, head prophetess of the temple. Avidius is still all broken up over the fact that he isn't real, but he poses some very interesting and philosophical questions that pretty much explain everything. Avidius realizes
an undeniable truth. Existence is anchored in connection, feeling, and memory. They are its very manifestation.
So if someone uses their resonance ability to fabricate a memory of a hero of heroes and convinces everyone it's real, does that fabricated person really exist? So after speaking with Avidius, we go and speak with Grandma Lilibet, and she says that Augusta already told her what's up. So she did some digging before we even got there. And just like everyone else, Grandma Lilibet can't remember Yuno either, but she found some evidence of her existence. However, according to that evidence, she died 3 years ago, and Rover is taken aback. But Lilibet says there's a difference between death and disappearance. She deduces that the current situation must be some sort of fabrication. We're confused by all of this. But Lilibet basically says, when someone dies, they die. There's no reason to replace memories or generate fabrications, so something is off. She reluctantly admits that Avidius' logic was correct, even though he was mainly talking about his situation. Because remember, Avidius said existence itself is anchored in connection, feeling, and memory. They are its very manifestation. Since we remember Yuno, despite everyone else not knowing who she is, we've anchored her connection to reality. So Yuno is caught in the chaos between existence and non-existence. Following the instructions of Grandma Lilibet, we arrive at the location where records say Yuno died 3 years ago. There we're able to dive into fate, relive her memories, including the day she defied fate. Then we pull her from the chaos to an unknowable void of possibility, where she can make her own fate and decide to not be a prophetess. In the end, no one still remembers Yuno, but she's alive, out of the chaos, and back in the real world. However, she's confident that eventually, once again, her, Augusta, and the rest of her friends will be thick as thieves. After all this time in Septimon, we head back to the Black Shores with the Sentinel's relic, only to find out we still can't access it. However, going back to the Black Shores did give us a bit more information on it from Tethys, and that's that this relic is called the Civilization Capsule, and it requires the Denodian's power to activate. With this, we decide to go back to Raguna and Planned, and finally reconnect with Cardathea to see if she can access it. However, while walking around Raguna, we notice something's different. The weather in the city's atmosphere has totally changed, and we find out that many of the people in Raguna have been having strange dreams lately. Despite not being from Raguna, we also find ourselves being no exception. In this strange dream we're having, we're in the journeying paradise, and we can hear Cristofaro's voice narrating the fates of all our Renaissance friends. And most notably, we see the death of Cardathea. At the end of the dream, Tacit Discords bow to us as the harbinger of the dark tide. Galbrenna appears and tells us to leave, and then she ejects us from the dream. But before this scene ends, Galbrenna speaks to Leviathan, saying she will deliver her death, referring to Cardathea. Okay, so what's going on here? In Acts 10 and 11, a lot of things happen, and we're given quite a bit of new information that I honestly think should have been built up over more of the previous acts. But anyway, let's go ahead and get to the bottom of it as quickly and concisely as possible. So what's so cavalierly presented to us is the fact that Cardathea was never truly rid of the Thernotians' power. It's not explained why this isn't a problem, considering that it's implied that that's kind of why we fought her in Act 4. But anyway, the brilliant gem we've been talking about was only a small sliver of the Thernotians' power inside of her. And another important point is the fact that the Thernotian that we're up against right now isn't the same OG Thernotian from the first and second Dark Tides. This is an entirely different but related being. This is an artificial Thernotian, and it was created and powered up by the Fractidus' actions. The OG Thernotian still exists because it can't truly be destroyed, but it's still super weak right now. Nonetheless, this fact that the Fractidus is actually controlling this artificial Thernotian and using that to affect the actions of Gilberto and Fenrico, and we don't even know how far back this plan goes, but this recontextualizes so many things looking back. Anyways, because both Cardathea and Galbrenna are both deeply connected to the Dark Tide, I would assume that the case is that they both have some mastery over it. So Leviathan can't read their minds like regular people. However, Abby's mysterious ailment is that it's been corrupted by the Dark Tide, and as a result, it can read our minds. And because of Abby's condition, we are now the harbingers of the Dark Tide. So Cardathea and Galbrenna hatch a plan in secret, and they're just trusting we'll roll with it when the time comes. The plan is basically that the Thernotian will naturally want to reclaim Cardathea and the rest of the power inside of her. So Cardathea wants to sacrifice herself for this plan. Man, this girl loves dying. I don't know what it is. But anyway, she wants to sacrifice herself by essentially splitting herself again, separating her humanity from her godhood. She wants to have one version of herself, her humanity, be absorbed by the Dark Tide in order to pin it down and be able to trap its frequency in one place so we can be able to squabble with it. So they use Turvan to split Cardathea's humanity and godhood, and Galbrenna stages the death of Cardathea's humanity to confuse the Thernotian into thinking it has the real thing when it absorbs her. Point of note, Cardathea isn't truly dead. They just needed the Leviathan and Rover to believe it's true. Literally everybody knows what's going on except us. All our friends are just acting. So with this framework in the background, let's talk about all the things that happen. We head to Cardi's realm, the inverted tower, and Cardi set it up so that Contarella would also be arriving there at around the same time. We arrive just in time to see her get murked, and in the middle of it, we sense something is odd about this whole situation, but we can't really put our finger on it. Nonetheless, Rover is heated, and we use Abby to track down the Dark Tide frequency tied to Galbrenna. Along the way, we run into Avidius. Avidius finally feels free because he realizes that nothing from Cristofaro has been written about him in Raguna as opposed to Septimon. He feels like he can finally write his own destiny. He tells us what he knows about Galbrenna, and together we track down her Dark Tide frequency to Averardo Bank. There we're confronted by a false Fenrico, and he wants us to give him the civilization capsule, but we realize how reckless he's moving around the civilians. And additionally, we remember we left Fenrico at the bottom of the sea in the Fabricatorium, so he's starting to look real suspect. In the same moment, we see Galbrenna risk her life to save a civilian, and so then things start to click, and we start to deduce that there's more to her than meets the eye. After this, Avidius stops the fake Fenrico false sovereign from seizing the civilization capsule, and he tosses it back to us. But since he's created with dark tide energy, just his touch was enough to activate it. And so we dive inside, and once inside, we're able to speak to an AI version of Imperator that it backed up on this device. We find out that this device was meant to carry the true history of Renacita and to be opened by Cartathea for her to essentially be able to understand the real past of Renacita if she was still being brainwashed by the Thernotian. After leaving the capsule, we hear about Avidius becoming unhinged due to the dark tide taking over, so we go out to find him. And what we find is he was just trying to help people and helping to fight the tide spawn, but he was overwhelmed and then became corrupted. And as a result, we end up having to put him down, only for Cristofaro to emerge and essentially rub it in our faces by saying he couldn't outrun fate after all. After this, we head to Septimon to join the front lines in the fight against the dark tide. We connect with all our Renacitan companions, and they're ready to join us at this makeshift base camp. So the plan is to go into the journeying paradise. Meanwhile, our Black Shores companions are aiding and protecting the citizens of Raguna at Alvarado Bank. In order to be able to navigate and withstand the dark tide, we're given Sentinel Imperator's blessed lantern relic from Choyuan. And Choyuan has been working behind the scenes this whole time as a result of instruction from Mingting. So he actually went to the Fabricatorium to get it while we're doing all this other stuff. So eventually we dive into the journeying paradise and we purify the Anchor Stone, allowing our friends to be able to enter. We break free of the fate Cristofaro had pinned for us and face off against Leviathan with all of our friends. During its defeat, Leviathan calls out to Abby, yelling, After this, the Fraxidus retreats, reminding Rover that our paths were never truly opposed, saying they were once our waystones. Then we hear Fenrico's voice speaking to us, telling us to lift the lantern. His frequency aids us in escaping the paradise and destroying the lingering dark tide energy. At the Black Shores, Galbrenna is recruited as a consultant and given a Blake Bloom flower. However, this isn't the only interesting thing we discover at the Black Shores. It turns out that the Thernotian's gem isn't all fully accounted for. There's one frequency that remains missing. And finally, somewhere in Renacita, the Fraxidus members meet discussing their future plans, and they've now set their sights on La Haroi, where apparently they've had success in some unknown metric. And that, folks, is the story of Wuthering Waves 2.x series. This was a long video and a lot of work. If you haven't already liked and shared it, please do so, man. Help and support this effort. I hope you guys also didn't mind my voice getting a little bit crusty midway through. I got sick in the process of making this video. So that's why we have a voice change during the middle of it. But anyway, man, let me know your favorite part of the 2.x series. I'm looking forward to reading all your comments. And the 2.x series left us with a lot of lingering questions, like the fact that past Rover from Chapter 2 Prologue knew about Abby's condition beforehand. So it begs the question, what exactly happened 20 years ago? And why did Leviathan call out to Abby, asking why it betrayed them? Also, who is them? Other Thernotians? But anyways, I think it'll be fun to talk about these things probably another time. But anyways, man, I appreciate you all for watching. And until next time, I'll catch you in the waves. Peace.